In the heart of the Eternal City, where marble columns once gleamed under the relentless Italian sun, and the roar of crowds filled the Colosseum like thunder from the gods themselves, a shadow began to stretch across the empire that had ruled the known world for centuries. The year was around 380 AD, and Rome stood not as a crumbling ruin, but as a colossus still breathing, its legions marching along pristine roads that connected distant provinces from Britannia to North Africa. Yet beneath the surface of imperial pomp, something insidious stirred, an internal conflict that would prove deadlier than any barbarian horde at the gates. No foreign army had yet breached the walls in force, but the fractures were widening within the very soul of Roman society, invisible to most, yet undeniable to those who dared look closer. The collapse did not begin with chaos. It began quietly, in the hushed corridors of power and the silent despair of the common citizen. The Roman Empire at its height had been a marvel of human organization, a vast machine of law, engineering, and military might that imposed order on a chaotic world. From the forums bustling with merchants haggling over spices from the east, to the aqueducts channeling crystal waters into public baths, where senators debated philosophy, daily life pulsed with a rhythm of confidence and continuity. Farmers in the Italian countryside tended olive groves under the watchful gaze of villa owners, while in the provinces, local elites emulated Roman customs, building theaters and bathhouses to signal their loyalty. Slavery sustained the economy, feeding the insatiable appetite for grain from Egypt and wine from Gaul. Families gathered for meals under oil lamps, recounting tales of past glories under emperors like Trajan and Hadrian. But this veneer of stability masked deeper divisions, between the wealthy senatorial class clinging to pagan traditions and the rising influence of Christianity, between the urban poor crammed into insulae tenements and the rural landowners burdened by ever-increasing taxes. Life continued in its familiar patterns, yet a quiet unease lingered in the air, like the heavy stillness before a storm. Early warning signs flickered like distant lightning on the horizon, often dismissed as temporary setbacks by those in power. The debasement of currency, where emperors mixed cheaper metals into silver coins to fund endless military campaigns, sparked inflation that eroded the savings of merchants and soldiers alike. Corruption seeped into the bureaucracy, with provincial governors siphoning funds meant for road repairs and frontier defenses. Civil wars between rival claimants to the throne became alarmingly frequent, draining resources and loyalty as legions turned against each other in bloody battles across the Italian peninsula and the Balkans. Yet the average Roman farmer or artisan paid little heed. The empire had weathered crises before: the sack of Rome by the Gauls centuries earlier, the near collapse during the 3rd century crisis. Rome endures, they whispered in taverns, unaware that these internal conflicts were not mere ripples, but the first cracks in the foundation of a system built on expansion and unity. The silence around these issues grew louder, a collective denial that prevented meaningful reform. As the 4th century progressed, rising tension transformed these isolated fractures into systemic instability. The division of the empire into eastern and western halves under Diocletian, and later formalized by Theodosius, was intended to ease administrative burdens, but it instead fostered rivalry and weakened the West's ability to respond cohesively. Economic pressures mounted as trade routes faltered under banditry and neglected infrastructure, while heavy taxation to support a bloated military and courtly extravagance pushed small farmers into debt and serfdom. Social breakdowns emerged in the form of religious strife. Edicts favoring Christianity alienated pagan elites, while doctrinal disputes within the church diverted attention from practical governance. In the streets of Rome, food shortages sparked riots, and the once proud legions, now filled with Germanic recruits whose loyalty was questionable, grumbled over unpaid wages. The air in the Senate House grew thick with accusations and intrigue, as ambitious generals and eunuch advisors maneuvered for influence. No one yet spoke of collapse, but the empire's internal conflicts, political fragmentation, economic decay, and cultural schisms were eroding the bonds that had held it together for half a millennium. Key decisions and mistakes accelerated the descent, each one a misstep born of short-term desperation. Emperors like Honorius, secluded in Ravenna's marshy safety, prioritized palace politics over frontier security, allowing corrupt officials to auction off military commands. The reliance on foederati, barbarian tribes settled within Roman borders as allies, seemed pragmatic amid manpower shortages. Yet it diluted Roman military discipline and created semi-autonomous enclaves that owed allegiance more to their chieftains than to the emperor. Heavy conscription and punitive taxes alienated the very populations needed to sustain the state, driving many into banditry or flight to the countryside. Religious policies, while unifying under one faith, deepened divides between Orthodox believers and heretical groups, fracturing societal cohesion at a time when unity was paramount. These pressures were not abstract. They manifested in hushed conversations among senators fearing assassination, in the exhausted sighs of tax collectors facing rebellious villages, and in the growing desertions from auxiliary units. By the time these choices revealed their full cost, the machinery of empire had begun to seize. The moment the system began to fail arrived not with a single cataclysmic event, but through a cascade of internal ruptures that exposed the empire's fragility. In 410 AD, the Visigoths under Alaric, once federated allies, turned against their Roman hosts after years of broken promises and mistreatment. As they marched on Rome, internal divisions prevented a unified defense. Rival factions in the court debated while the city's ancient walls, long neglected, offered little resistance. The sack that followed was shocking not for its total destruction. Alaric's forces spared many churches and withdrew after days, but for what it symbolized: the heart of the empire violated by those it had once commanded. Panic spread through provinces as news traveled along faltering roads. Governors in Gaul and Hispania declared independence or allied with invaders, while economic collapse intensified as coinage lost all value and trade halted. The internal conflicts that had simmered for decades now boiled over, revealing a polity hollowed out from within, where loyalty to Rome meant little amid personal survival. Human consequences unfolded in waves of suffering that scarred generations. In the cities, once vibrant forums emptied as famine and disease claimed the weak, while refugees flooded from frontier zones, overwhelming strained resources. Families that had known only Roman order now faced lawlessness, with bandit groups roaming former highways and local strongmen carving out personal fiefdoms. Social breakdown was visceral. Slaves rebelled or fled, urban poor turned to scavenging, and the middle classes vanished into poverty. Mothers in rural villas clutched children close as rumors of approaching war bands echoed through olive groves. The silence of abandoned villas, their frescoes fading under dust, spoke volumes of lives interrupted. Fear replaced routine. Markets that once echoed with bargaining fell quiet, replaced by the distant clash of steel or the wail of mourners. This was no glorious end in battle, but a grinding disintegration where trust evaporated and neighbor turned against neighbor in the scramble for security. The long-term historical impact of these internal conflicts reshaped not only the West, but the trajectory of Western civilization itself. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD, when the last emperor Romulus Augustulus was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, marked the end of centralized authority in Europe for centuries. What emerged was a fragmented landscape of kingdoms, where Roman law, language, and infrastructure persisted in fragments, but under new masters. The internal rot had paved the way for feudalism, the preservation of classical knowledge in monasteries, and the eventual rise of medieval Europe. Byzantium in the east endured longer, a testament to stronger institutions, but the West's collapse highlighted how internal divisions, unchecked ambition, economic short-sightedness, and social fractures could fell even the mightiest powers. Echoes of this rupture influenced everything from the Holy Roman Empire's claims to the Renaissance revival of Roman ideals, serving as a cautionary tale across millennia. Yet as the dust settled over ruined aqueducts and overgrown forums, a haunting reflection lingered on the nature of civilizations. Rome had not been destroyed by overwhelming external force alone. Its internal conflicts had invited and amplified every threat, turning strength into vulnerability. The once invincible legions disbanded, the Senate's debates faded into memory, and the eternal city became a shadow of its former self. Its population dwindled, its monuments quarried for new churches. In the quiet ruins where wind whispered through broken arches and vines claimed marble statues of forgotten emperors, one could sense the fragility of all human endeavors. Empires rise on unity and vision, but they fall when those bonds dissolve in greed, division, and denial. The collapse of Rome was not the end of history, but a profound reminder that the greatest threats often emerge not from beyond the borders, but from within the hearts and halls of those entrusted with power. What future societies might learn from these silent stones remains a question carried on the winds of time, urging vigilance against the quiet conflicts that precede every fall.